former running mate, the current president, Joe Biden. For Donald Trump, the question has always been in Nevada, if he were to flip the state, he would have to do work in Washoe County. It looks like that work is actually coming together right now. And then, of course, all important Clark County, where the majority of the vote in this state actually comes from. This is, of course, the Vegas area. And you're watching, again, Harris underperforming where Biden was in 2020, 95% of this vote total in. So we'll continue keeping an eye on Nevada. And then just coming down, again, a little further south in Arizona, still too close to call, but you're seeing Trump with just about 52% of the vote, Harris with 47%. And this is a story that we often tell out of Maricopa County. And you're seeing Trump still be able to do the work of flipping this county back into his column. The interesting story in Maricopa, too, is the ways in which this has really bounced only once into the Democratic column. Trump seeing decisive victory here in 2016 and then even more decisive in 2024. 63% of this vote total in. But these are two that we'll be watching closely. You mentioned this. Of course, we know that Donald Trump has clinched the presidency, but we will also be watching that popular vote total. Just a few of the things that we're still keeping an eye on, in addition to, of course, my favorite, the Congress balance of power. But this map is way more full, I think, than many of us thought it would be.
And that critical balance of power, Allie, we will be talking about throughout the remainder of this morning. Stay with us, Allie, if you would. But I want to bring in NBC's Dasha Burns, who is coming to us from West Palm Beach, Florida. Good morning. So Trump declared victory very early this morning. We're going to be hearing from him today as well.
Yeah, that's right. A little bit later today, I think he's taking his time, according to campaign sources, to sort of soak it all in at Mar-a-Lago. The commanding win that he had last night came as a surprise to him as well. I don't think anyone was expecting it to happen so quickly, even though the campaign has been projecting confidence for some time now. Look, this is a candidate and a campaign that was anything but conventional, and the former president took his message of a broken nation to people and places that Republicans rarely reach. And it's the data that's showing that that is what helped him run up the numbers in rural and in urban areas, and to have his third and most successful campaign. This is a deliberate strategy from the Trump campaign. What we saw with him reaching out to black men, to Latino voters. This is something I've been watching for almost the entire year now. They poured a lot of money into it. They poured a lot of time into it. And they didn't campaign in the traditional way. Look, there was a lot of criticism, Jose, of their ground game, that it wasn't as robust as Harris's. But in part, they were banking on this unconventional candidate and his ability to reach voters when he was doing these things that Republicans rarely do, like rallying in the Bronx, like rallying in New Jersey. You know, he kept saying he's going to win New Jersey, Virginia, New Mexico. Of course, we don't expect him to win those states, but he did run up the numbers in those places. And as I was traveling the country talking to voters throughout this year, the frustration was apparent, the anger was apparent, the feeling that the country was moving in the wrong direction, and that is something that the former president really capitalized on. And the message of joy and optimism just wasn't resonating as much when I was talking to voters, and that seems to be what the data now lays bare as we talk here on a Wednesday morning, Jose.
All right, Dasha Burns, thank you. And we know you are tracking the very latest movements from the Trump campaign. Thank you for your hurried getting up for us, hence the slightly odd audio we were hearing there. Shooting that off a cell phone this morning. I do want to note J.D. Vance just tweeted out his thanks. He says, "Thank you to my beautiful wife for making it possible to do this, to President Donald J. Trump for giving me such an opportunity to serve our country at this level, and to the American people for their trust. I will never stop fighting for all of you." So that now the Vice President-elect, J.D. Vance, making his first statement, I believe, since the election was called for now President-elect Donald Trump. Let's head out to NBC's Mike Memoli, who is joining us with Vice President Harris's reaction this morning from the Harris camp. What can you fill us in on?
Well, just think about where we were 36 hours ago. The vice president herself saying that this was going to be a close election, but that she felt momentum was on her side. The campaign was saying they felt that they had a path to victory in all 7 of those battleground states. And as we look at the map right now, 5 of those 7 battleground states have gone to President-elect Trump, with Trump leading in those 2 other states. So to say, Anna and Jose, that there is a sense of shock and bewilderment on the part of the Harris campaign and of those in the White House behind me who now have to grapple with a transition back to Donald Trump, I think is an understatement. At this point, we know Cedric Richmond, the campaign co-chair, told those supporters who gathered at Howard University last night that they would hear from the vice president today. There's no indication that when we hear from the vice president, she's going to do anything other than concede this race. But as one senior official said to me, that they understand that there's a lot of work to be done here, and that this is a lot more than just campaign and politics. Because think about the way Democrats conducted this campaign in warning about what was at stake in this election, the stake being so high that our very democracy was at risk. The shock as well is felt among the supporters of the Harris campaign. And so the vice president in her remarks today is going to need to speak to that as well, to what is a very uncertain future, a very fearful future for many Americans who supported her in her campaign. And so that's going to be part of what we hear from the vice president. And then we do expect President Biden will also speak after the vice president as well.
Mike Memoli, thank you very much.
Let's bring in our MSNBC political analysts now. Democratic strategist Basil Smikle, former George W. Bush White House aide Elise Jordan, and former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development Julian Castro.
Elise, I want to start with you. Trump is winning the popular vote, it seems, and if it holds, it would make him the first Republican to do that since your boss, George W., got it in 2004. What are your thoughts this morning about that?
It is a sweeping victory, a mandate of sorts, and we're seeing that with what's happening probably with the House and the Senate. Trump is going to go into office very empowered. He is picking up, a number of swing states that just analysts days ago did not think it was possible. It's going to be, the story now is how does he use his mandate?
Basil, your top takeaways. What message did American voters send?
Well, a good chunk of the American voter wanted to take their country back, and we will soon see what that means. There are levels of sexism and racism that clearly a lot of people in this country are willing to tolerate, which is also something that, we may have woken up in the same country in a sense, but that becomes much more clear this morning. I would also say that there were conversations for over a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks about how black men weren't doing their part. Black people did their part and did everything they needed to do, including the black woman who ran. So this isn't, and going to a point that Mike Memoli had made earlier, this isn't a Democratic problem per se, because it's not a problem that can be solved with a campaign. These are deep-rooted issues in our country that we absolutely need to address. And frankly, I think that, and as we're talking about big D Democratic politics, the coalition that we had relied on is now 30 years old, and it has frayed. And that is something that I think as a party going forward, folks need to figure out what that coalition is going to look like.
Julian, your thoughts on that, because and I'm interested in Basil's part about a coalition that is frayed. How do you see it?
Well, I mean, I think that remains to be seen, right? We've seen other high watermarks for Republicans. George W. Bush getting about 44% of the vote. Reagan did well in the 1980s. There was a time when people thought of the Latino community as voters more as up for grabs, right? Then when Obama changed that a few years ago and got basically 73%, and then everybody started talking about the community as just Democrats. I think this election showed that they are more up for grabs. And I think the message that resonated was an economic message. Largely, the Latino community is diverse, obviously, different places and so forth, but it's basically a working class community and a very aspirational one. And Trump lies a lot. But one of the things he said in every speech was, when I was president, we had the greatest economy, the greatest economy, the greatest economy, and look what we have now with high gas prices and high grocery prices. And I think that enough people bought that. And we're going to spend a lot of time, I know, trying to untangle that. But fundamentally, I think that was the biggest factor with the community.
You know, and back to Basil's point again, I mean, did the community do their part? Did the Latino community do their part in this election?
Yeah, I think this narrative is setting in that worries me somehow, that blames the Latino community. And I think that you got to give every community their agency, right? I mean, they're responding like anybody else would. On top of that, even if you believe the exit poll, 53% of Latinos supported Kamala Harris, right? And so it's still a majority and a governing, positive part of the Democratic coalition. And I think that Democrats need to build on that and really, really understand what happened. They basically got to do the analog of what Republicans did after Romney lost in 2012. They did that autopsy to figure it out. Yeah. And Democrats, I think, need to figure that out.
I got to say, and this is not, and I want to be clear, this is not about finger pointing to specific communities. It's not. But there was finger pointing in saying that this community of black folk, black men in particular, but black people in general, what are we going to do? Are we going to get behind the candidate? And that happened. So my point is not so much.
But that was a discussion that happened in both sides of the aisle.
And there was some,
listen,
there was some growth that Trump saw in places like Wisconsin, right?
I have
with
no
members of the black community, black voters.
He was going to pick people off in different communities anyway. That's to be expected. But my point is that, you know, over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking a lot about who's going to do their part. And the folks that need to do their part did their part. But I don't want to single anybody out. What I do want to single out is the fact that there was blatant racism and sexism in this campaign cycle. And my question is, what are we going to do about that? What are we going to do about the fact that that language was directed towards all of us at this table? Whether you're Latino, African American, or as a woman, the language that he used to define and describe Nancy Pelosi in the last day did not seem to matter. And no campaign and no party can really fix that until we find a way forward. And I think that, as you asked me about my takeaway, that to me is the root of all of this, that we have not addressed that core issue in our country.
So let me play some of what we heard from Donald Trump early this morning, before the official vote was called for him that he won this election. Here's what he said as part of his victory speech.
We're going to help our country heal. We're going to help our country heal. We have a country that needs help, and it needs help very badly. We're going to fix our borders. We're going to fix everything about our country.
Just a reminder, this is the man who lied about the results of the 2020 election, who's been accused of inciting an attack on the Capitol because of those lies, and who has called his political opponents the enemy from within. Elise, he wants to heal, he says. How can he do that?
On the positive side, if I'm going to try to say anything to look to the positive, when Trump feels like a winner, he usually is more controlled, and his behavior is more controlled, as you saw at the Republican National Convention. That it's when he feels under the worst attack that we see the absolute worst of him and what he's really made of. So let's hope there's a grace period as he basks in the victory.
But what does healing look like?
This country has so much to heal for so many years. I just hope everyone comes together and remembers we all want to have